Welcome to the sun today for the 13th of January 2022. After a couple of days without any flares, we had our first C flares this morning. We'll cover our usual topics. First of all, we'll start off with sunspots, and there's a new group emerging on the sun. As I say, we've had 2 C flares this morning. Not very much in the way of new CMEs, coronal mass ejections. The solar wind is becoming a little bit variable, but overall is quiet. Geospace is quiet, at least for the moment. Well, let's take a look at the sunspots as we normally do. We'll start off with region 2924, which is approaching the west limb of the sun. It's the largest region on there, and there's been a little bit of development in the leader spot, but I still think this region is, if anything, decaying. Then there's 2926, which is approaching the west limb also, but in the northern hemisphere. That actually seems to be growing slightly. We had a new region a couple of days ago, which is now numbered active region 2928. That too seems to be growing slightly. There's a region growing in the northern hemisphere here, which just a couple of faint spots yesterday is now quite a complex of spots. Then there's active region 2927, which is basically one large spot and a couple of satellite spots. So nothing very much to write home about there. And then we have active region 2925, which is one large spot. We have one new region growing down here, and that is just 2 small spots at the moment, but may well grow in the next few days. The sunspot number, as it comes from the Solar Influences Data Center, has continued to rise. It's now at about 85, a very similar level to what it was at this time last part of the cycle. However, it does not seem to be rising as fast as it did last time, so perhaps we won't reach the heights of 150 sunspot numbers. Our last C flare was on January 11th at about 8 a.m. UT, and we've had a long near C flare yesterday, which was that coronal mass ejection that I talked about. And we've had 2 sharpish C flares this morning. One is a C2 and one's a C3 event, and those have both come from the region that's behind the limb. So I suspect that we're going to get a lot more of those in the coming days. Well, let's see some movies. First, we'll take a look at the Sunspot movie from the Solar Dynamics HMI instrument, and this will cover the dates for the 11th to the 13th of January. Next, we'll have a look at a movie from the Solar Dynamics Observatory AIA instrument, the 94 angstrom channel. This is the high temperature channel, 6 million degrees Kelvin. And from this, we'll be able to see the flares, particularly watch the northeast limb. Next, we'll take a look at the large-scale corona using the SOHO-LASCO coronagraph. And here we're looking for repeats of that beautiful coronal mass ejection that we had yesterday to see whether that region that's coming over the east limb is perpetually active or that was just a one-off event. The solar wind is looking a bit more interesting, although the BZ component, which is the vertical component of the interplanetary magnetic field, remains stubbornly around about 0, so there's not going to be much chance of reconnection in the short term. The density is beginning to fluctuate quite a bit, going down to very low levels of like 1 per cubic centimeter and up to about 5 per cubic centimeter. The speed of the solar wind has jumped. We have some high-speed solar wind coming through here at about 500 kilometers per second. The speed of the solar wind is up around about 500 kilometers per second, which is quite high and might induce some changes in the magnetosphere if it impacts it. Well, taking a look at the planetary K index, it seems to be very quiet around in the magnetosphere at the moment. However, if you look at the sun, this is an image from the 193 angstrom channel of SDO. You see there's a large coronal hole near the equator, and that should be lining up magnetically with the Earth in the next day or two, and we should see some disturbances from that, at least a high-speed wind, which may be what we were seeing earlier in that solar wind plot, but it will get stronger and more geo-effective as time goes by. So we'll see what happens there in the next day or two. So what conclusions can we draw from all of this? Well, the sunspot number is still increasing steadily, which is a sign that we're still got a very active sun at the moment. There's a very active region just behind the east limb of the sun, and that should be coming over the limb in the next day or two, and we will probably see a lot more activity as a result of that. And we have this trans-equatorial coronal hole about to become geo-effective, so we may get some geomagnetic storms, or at least a disturbed magnetosphere in the next day or two as well. So until next time, stay safe and goodbye.